Welcome to Raging Bullets, episode 405, Pop Culture and Whatnot with Chad Ciconne. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the Whatnot Segulin, and the Duke of You Know. On this episode, we're going to be talking with longtime friend of the show, Chad Ciconne, about his work on Fracture. Plus, he also takes us through the process of, he's got a new book that's in the works, he takes us through the process of developing that book, working with a writer, and also getting that to a stage where you want to take it to a publisher, which is a really unique opportunity to talk with a creator about what that process looks like behind the scenes. So this is a nice episode. It's something we haven't had an opportunity to do before, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk to Chad about this. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network, the League of Comic Book Podcasts, and the DCinfinite.com podcast partnership. Sponsoring this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, it's Vertigo month, and they have a Vertigo bundle at 50% off, but also all new Vertigo trades are 50% off. Remember, they are a Comixology and My Digital Comics digital partner. So if you connect those accounts to your DCB Service account, you earn 5% of those purchases towards your DCB Service order. Over at InStockTrades.com, we're talking about Fracture on this episode, and you can pick up the Fracture, Vice and Virtue trade paperback. It collects Volume 2, Issues 1 through 4, with our friend Chad Ciconne. It's regularly $11.99, 25% off, only $8.99. So if you listen to this episode, it's the first time you've been exposed to Fracture, go over to InStockTrades.com and pick up that trade. I'm picking it up just because on this episode we talk about some of the things that are different from the digital edition, which I'm really excited about picking up the trade. So I'm in. So I'll be picking that up from InStockTrades.com. Remember, orders of $50 or more give you free shipping. James, what kind of a podcast are we?
Pop Culture and Whatnot, a division of Raging Bullets, is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot associated with Action Lab's Fracture comic. So, if you haven't read the book, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
And Fracture actually is available now in both trade and digital format, so be sure to check out Fracture. But let's join Chad Ciconne with our discussion about Fracture.
Come on, Skreel. Let's pay these Plutonian beam makers a visit.
Joining us once again is friend of the show, Chad Ciconne from Fracture. And Chad, welcome back to Raging Bullets.
Thanks, glad to be here.
We're following up, actually, we had a discussion when Fracture Volume 2 was first kicking off. We started having a teaser discussion about the introductory issues, I should say, of this series. And I continued reading it through the weekly method, but Jim ended up getting the digital trade of Fracture Volume 2. So it was neat that I like that Comixology is offering a variety of different delivery methods for getting the comics if you like them digitally, but also the trade is coming out, or is out. It's actually, so the actual physical trade for people that are looking for that is available as well for Fracture Volume 2. Yep. So it's nice to see comics available in so many different methods.
Well, we're doing our best to make sure that Fracture and all the other Action Lab comics, because I'm one of the principals of Action Lab, and we're trying to make sure we have the books available in whatever form anybody wants to consume them. I'm personally, I kind of straddle the line. I still buy paper comics. I like to hold them. Mostly trades now. I'm buying single issues for my two little kids now to try to get them involved, but I read comics mostly in trades. But I also download a bunch of stuff on Comixology too, because I travel a lot and I like to have a boatload of comics sitting on my iPad whenever I'm on the road that I can just flip through.
From a company standpoint and from a creator standpoint, knowing that there is a digital option out there as well, because I'm in league with you. I like paper still. I like trade still. I like hardcover collections. I love having digital on my iPad, so I'm a weird hybrid as well, and I like that. But does that change the creative process at all, or the publisher process of it? Is there anything to that? I don't know how that would work on that side. Is it any different than what you would have done when there was just paper?
Not the original, for the books I've worked on. Not the original creative process doesn't change. When I'm doing layouts and page work for the book, I'm still laying out and drawing the comic in the vertical portrait standard comic book orientation for a print presentation. It does add a step. I don't know that it necessarily adds a step, but it does add a step because Action Lab was one of the earlier publishers that was working with Comixology on what they called their guided view, which is kind of the quasi-cinematic presentation where you tap and it adds panels and then you get a word balloon comes in and makes a little more interesting experience. There's additional steps in setting that up when you submit that to Comixology. I haven't personally done that, but our creative director, Dave Dwanch, and Sean Pryor, who was for a long time our director of digital comics, there was extra work required to format the files that you have to submit for Comixology to do guided view. And if you look at the fracture trade, there is some kind of splitting of the pages for a more horizontal presentation as opposed to the vertical portrait style that a print comic book is in. So the original production of the book is the same, but there's some pre-press work that's required on the digital side to get them ready to go. I think some people are just changing the format of how they're creating their books. For some of these companies, I don't know if it's Monkey Brain or Thrillbent. It was the one that was just doing books for digital first, and I think they're doing a more landscape presentation on their books in general.
Let's talk about Fracture a little bit, because I'm very interested in this book. The concept is real trippy, and I mean that in the most complimentary way, because I don't think I've read something in a while that's made me think so much after reading it about what it would be like to be a person with these issues. I wanted to say superhero because that's naturally what I go to, but it's so complicated with him that you can't really label him, and that's what I find so refreshing about it. You've got this guy with this multiple personality disorder that is, I think, stuck with so much pressure that comes along with it. He's got a family, and he wants that family to have a normal, quote unquote, normal life.
Well, he kind of has a family.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues. Are they his family or are they not?
Mm-hmm. That's the part that I really like about the series, because you're right to correct me there, because one of the things that I enjoy is every time he wakes up with a different personality, there's a whole new supporting cast that he's getting to know, because he really wakes up in the same place that we do. As far as, he'll be in a diner, and then all of a sudden there's a girl there, and he's like, who are you?
Well, I kind of interpreted it kind of as a beat or a take on the old Quantum Leap when he goes in and he was, oh boy, he would just kind of wake up in someone's body and in a different situation. So for this guy, it's always the same body, but it's a different situation, a different person or personality. So he has to kind of think on his feet and adapt and react. What's the situation? What am I dealing with here?
It's almost like seeing Quantum Leaf from the reverse side, because we always traveled along in Quantum Leaf with Sam, and he didn't lose himself in it, but by jumping into these other people in Quantum Leap, they lost time. It would be interesting to see afterwards what happens with them, if they at some point in time, if they ever come to the realization that they didn't actually do these things somebody else did. That's what I like about Fracture. He loses time and doesn't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because many times he can do these wonderfully amazing things, and there's other times where he finds out that he's some new villain that is doing horrid things, and he somehow has personalities that have to thwart it. I love that rich aspect of it. Is there a limitation with the fact that these are done in limited series? Are there like bits when you get to the end of each miniseries where you're like, geez, there's a place I wanted to go with this that we weren't able to? You know, there's something that we're saving for the next one that I wanted to tease more. Does that work when you're working with a miniseries?
The writer, Sean Gabrin, has, I think, either 5 or 6 of these miniseries plotted out. He hasn't written them yet, but he is ready to proceed with up to 5 or 6 of these miniseries. And the way he's told me he writes is he kind of has the end point. He knows how it's all going to end. And he knows the beats. He just hasn't written the miniseries yet. And very frankly, we've in discussions with Action Lab, it's based on how well did it sell. Will we do another miniseries? Will we take a break and let people miss it and then come back and do another miniseries? But Sean's got 5 or 6 of them kind of programmed and ready to go when he and I decide, all right, we're going to do another one, and Action Lab's ready to publish it. So we just finished Volume 2. Sean and I were both ready to take a break and do something else for a short term. And the question is when we'll come back and do Volume 3. But he's got several of them ready.
Do you, when the new personalities come in, how does your creative process work with Sean on that? Like, does Sean lay out for you, like, this is what I want this character to look like? Is that a collaborative process? Do you handle that part? How does that relationship work? Because it really is very rich and dynamic when a new personality comes in. There's drastic changes to how the character looks outwardly with costumes and relating to his powers.
Well, Sean will give me some notes on what he thinks or his ideas of the character should be, and I'll do some sketches, and we exchange them back and forth. And I'm trying to remember if in Volume 2 we got to the point where I would just sort of put my ideas down on the page as I was laying them out, and he would give me some thoughts, and we would talk about color schemes, and would this look better in green, or should it be brown, or would the guy have a hat, or would the hair be different? So it was collaborative in that the original ideas for everything in Fracture come from Sean, because he's the writer and the original creator, and I would do up designs, and we would just bat them back and forth by email, or jump on the Skype and say, oh, that looks good, let's change that.
See, I'd like when we get to see those moments where we have Brian and Jeff together, because you're drawing the same person, but you're putting nice subtle nuances in there that they are two different people. You see their different personalities come up. Is that something that, is it harder to draw the same person a little bit different than two completely different bodies?
It was. That was the biggest challenge, and I think we wanted to make the Brian character, because of what happens in the plot going forward with him, kind of a little more of sort of a jerk personality, and we said, all right, well, let's put a big USA belt buckle on him and just a white tank top, and we did as much as we could with just the costumes and what they were wearing to try to sell the gag of, oh, these are the same guy. And, you carry it with the dialogue and the costume, and the readers get the message of what's going on.
One of the issues with cloning, and I love how, we got a scientist who's exploring his clones. It's under this guise of, I'm helping you, but...
Is he?
Yeah. I mean, I love that part because... there's obviously a scientific fascination to helping him out with his issues, where it's like, hey, if I can give him pills to help out with this, we can experiment with ways to suppress and also ways to bring out specific fractures. That's going to help me with the sheer amount of clones, because I love that reveal that he's just got not just one clone that he made to help him. He's got a whole basement full of them. And obviously, anything he's doing to help him is also helping his it's ideally for him, it's helping his research. And I like that twist. I like that there's a lot of layers to this story.
Well, did either of you read it in print? You read the digital. One of you mentioned that you read it.
Yeah, I did the digital trade.
Sean, did you read it in print? Because there is a back matter page that is the lab notebook of the Dr. Atomic character that details all sorts of back information and additional information about his experimentation process and the clone process, and there's some information out there about one of the clones dying or escaping, or there's a whole bunch of. Sean wrote it, and I sort of gave him some ideas, and he tweaked it, and it's a really interesting read. But I don't think that's in the digital version.
It's not
in the print.
No. Is it in the trade? Do you know?
Yeah, it would be in the trade.
Because I'll pick up the trade for that. It's funny, I like the story enough that I'll purchase it for extras. I like extras, actually.
Buy 3 copies.
I actually really like the idea and concept of extras. I do the same thing with DVDs and movies. When they re-release and they've got some cool extra features and I enjoyed something, I'll do that. So that's a reason for me to pick up the trade. Let's talk about the trade a little bit. When you guys collect it in trades, besides obviously that option, which for me is a draw enough, are there other features that you put into the trade?
No, actually, I think Action Labs trades, and this is strictly a cost. The trades are the single issues, literally put together in a trade format. For some of the special books, the hardcover books, they're a different treatment. But for our sort of mini-series, the trades are simply a collection of the single issues.
Which is good for the people that are looking for. There's a whole market now of direct-to-trade readers. It's become a whole collector's market. I think that started a while ago with the Vertigo movement. When DC was doing the whole Vertigo thing, there was a whole Barnes & Noble crowd that was very into, and they were actually marketed to, for Vertigo titles at kind of at their peak. And it's nice now that has translated into a different kind of collector's market, because I think that's really a thriving market now. Hardcovers, trades, collected editions, as far as a delivery method.
Well, I probably fall into that category. I don't have the space anymore to keep. I used to have long boxes just like everybody else and kind of be a bit of a collector. And I have kids now. I don't have the space for that. So I've got my office and my studio, and I buy stuff in trade, and I read them all, and the ones I really love I hang on to and put on my shelf, and the others I donate to the library.
That's cool. That's a cool idea. I didn't think about that, actually, that you could do library donations. It's a great way to get more books in for the library.
Oh, yeah. I build my collection of stuff that I keep that's just the most special of the special things that I really love, or artists that I just die for.
I have a lot of trades and things where, if it was you mentioned specific stories that you like to collect, there's been times where they'll release some sort of mega hardcover version, of something that it's an anniversary version or something like that, where I have the single issues still, I have the hardcover, the soft cover still, because I like the readability a lot of times of a good storyline in a trade, but I don't need all those versions anymore, and I've started gradually paring down some of those where it's do I really need three different variations? No, I don't. I really want that anniversary one that I got that has the re-released bells and whistles. So I should start doing that, because a lot of the trades, I look at if I eBay them or something like that, what I'm selling them for, I'm not really making much off of them, and I'd rather donate them to the library, because I actually quite often go to the library and get trades and things that I haven't picked up, just for financial reasons. I've got an incredibly large pull list. There's certain things where I'm looking for a trade or something like that to read for whatever reason, and I'll go to the library for it, and I love seeing the sheer amount of comic content there. I never thought about donating to it, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've got a lot of things that I know my library doesn't have that I would love to have other people have an opportunity to get exposed to. So that's cool.
Yeah, I read everything, and then I put them on a big stack, and once every 4 or 5 months I go through the stack and go, that's a keeper, library, keeper, library.
Yeah, I like that, because I think for a younger crowd, we talk about how do we get people into comics, and I think that's one of the ways to do it, at libraries, because I do notice when I go to I live in Mentor, Ohio, And when I go to the Mentor Library, quite a few teenagers are reading trades. That department, that area where they've got comic trades, is well populated. And
well, I think somebody else in my local area is doing it too, because I go in there and they got a whole bunch of manga in there, and I doubt the library's buying manga. Somebody's coming in and donating that stuff.
Yeah. So it's nice to see that. I think that's a way to reach a new audience, because we're constantly looking for that opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Here you guys are just two nice people doing all these wonderful things, and I'm going, and here I'm thinking, no way, I'm not giving this up. I'm putting an extra wing on my house to make room for this stuff.
Well, you're in a different position than we're in. It is funny how space drives that. He's making an interesting point. Because in your case, Jim, it's just you and your house. So, like, we've talked many times, like, I've got an office in my house that's my man cave. But you're, like you've mentioned many times, your house is your man cave. So you can literally plan, I need more comic space. Guess what this room is?
Currently, my living room right now is my sorting area for my comics. I'm reorganizing my comics. I'm just taking and doing large stacks of the individual titles throughout my living room. So I'm no longer using that as a living room. It's now my comics storage and sorting area.
Well, for me, it's space driven by space and time. In that, I don't have a lot of space to store stuff, and then when I read stuff, and I'm looking at that pile, the other issue I have is, okay, I have a finite amount of time now to devote to my comics hobby, and I'm also trying to be an artist. So am I realistically ever going to pick this book up again and read it? If not, why am I keeping it? If there's something I really, really love, I'll probably at some point in the future read it again. If there's something that was interesting but didn't make me do flips, I'm not going to read it again, so why is it just taking up space in my house?
One of the things I want to talk about in Fracture that I particularly enjoyed, we were talking about the Brian and Jeff relationship. Virtue has this confrontation with Vice, which it's so funny because of who Vice is. And Vice gets into his head and starts saying, well, what about your wife's relationship? And starts putting into his head that his wife may be having an affair with
his clone.
And, just crazy stuff that goes on there, because you could see how, well, this is a part of me. So if she was attracted to me, why wouldn't she be attracted to him? And does he have certain qualities, or does he not have? Because in that situation, I could see where I would be paranoid. Well, first of all, it's what qualities does he have that she really likes, but also what qualities do I have that he might be missing that she detests, which is kind of the reality we all have. When you're married, you're in a couple, we all have pros and cons to us. And the paranoia that comes there, I'm like, wow, this is like really rich. And coming to the fact that he is a little messed in the head.
Well, he's only part of the whole, as was talked about later by the Dr. Atomic character. It was intentional to just pull out a part of Jeff's psyche and put it in this clone. So what does that do to somebody?
And that becomes a big problem, because while you're leaving out all those fractured personalities, you're also leaving out certain qualities that he naturally has that maybe lead to fractures, and yet provide him some balance when he's just himself. And I love that.
The other thing I tried to add was, layering on top of that, what do we really know about this Dr. Atomic character?
Mm-hmm.
Was he manipulating the process for his own purposes on top of everything else?
He's the one that I'm still trying to get my hands on completely. One of the things, when I saw that massive room of all the clones in there, I started thinking, okay, who's the original? Who's the true original? Is Jeff, this guy who we think is our original, is he the real original? Is there somebody else out there that's causing this, where does this actually begin? What's the number one, the true number one? And I love the fact that I don't completely know yet.
Right, and we know nothing about the backstory of who this guy who's doing the clones is, or how he relates to any of those other characters, really.
I like that though. It makes it for a realistic environment, because that's true in any situation. You know, whenever you meet somebody new, you know, you're not, unless you were there at their birth, you don't know their entire backstory.
Sure.
So you're coming in partway through the storyline, and you have to rely on what you're told or what you learn gradually from that person in order to make your own judgments as far as where somebody falls in your level of trust and what you believe about them. That, I think, has made this story, for me, really rich and vibrant. With all the crazy that's going on in it, it's actually grounded very much in an emotional reality that I think is very true to the real world. And I love those twists and turns because, you know, it's a very heady book with all the crazy that's going on in it. But the ability of you guys, both through the dialogue and the art, to ground it so much in reality, I think has, because you could go really wacky with the whole thing and you lose touch with the part that connects us as a reader. I think what connects me as a reader with this so much, and why I've become such a big fan of Fracture, is the fact that it is so grounded in reality that when the crazy's happening around it, you believe it more, if that makes sense. Like, you're dealing into the Doctor and thinking about what he's doing and what twists and turns around there because you care, because he seems real. And I love that.
You try to add little dialogue beats or character moments to make it seem more not only fun but realistic and conversational. Like, one of my favorites was, there was in one of the scenes where they had gone to this doctor character to get help and try to figure out what was going on with Jeff. He says, "Oh, I can inject something into you to help with this problem," and there's a big needle lying on the table, and Jeff says, "Man, that's a big needle." He says, "Oh, that? No, that's not so big." And then he just jabs him in the back, and he pulls out this needle twice the size. No, it's the old Crocodile Dundee. That's not a knife. This is a knife. So the Doctor has a little bit of a sadistic streak in him because he didn't give any warning when he was going to jab the needle. It just kind of humanizes and gives you a little like, wow, is this guy a nice guy or a jerk or what is he?
Yeah, he's had a couple times when he likes to do that sudden surprise pain.
Yeah.
And I personally found those funny moments, especially because every single time Jeff's surprised. I'm like, dude, these metal things are crawling on your body. That's going to hurt in a minute. And like, there it is.
Look into this tiny lens. Bah!
You know, it's funny, when we're talking about Brian and Jeff, one of the things, and I mean, actually, we could extend that to, you know, the other personalities that manifest as well. Do you ever, as an artist, forget who you're drawing? Like, I mean, in the sense, like, you get so in the zone of drawing one of the two of them, or one of the many of them, I should say, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm drawing this other guy here. Because I never, as a reader, was taken, I knew who everybody was.
Well, I have to try to treat them as different characters.
Okay.
Because technically, they're acting and functioning as different characters. And if you technically look at the plot and the staging, you may be making assumptions that all of these people are Jeff. But it's not necessarily the case that all of these people are Jeff. I think Sean intentionally left it ambiguous of, is the Vice character Jeff? There's certainly a lot of suggestion that it may be Jeff, but it may not be Jeff. The character they call the Dandelion, the healer character, it's probably pretty clear that that's Jeff. But in drawing them, I treat them as separate characters. I think there's no other way for me to keep things straight and make it distinguishable for the reader anyway.
That's interesting that you mention that, because you're right. All of our validation is that Jeff has access to these power sets, meaning that these are split offs, assuming that, well, a lot of what Jim's saying, you know, because Jim's right, there's a question mark there. Is he really the prime player? But Jeff, we know, seems to be able to manifest each of the powers if he eventually gets in touch with them. He finds a way to start doing them. So I think that's the plot trick that makes us as a reader kind of go, oh, well, you know, Jeff is all of these guys. But you're right, especially knowing that there's a basement full of clones. And when you've got a masked character that we haven't quite seen revealed yet, you don't necessarily know. And that's what I really like and I find compelling about this is, you went through the first volume and, you had the hero and the villain, major villain, being the same guy with the main player in the middle. Very rich and very dynamic in the way that was developed. And you're left at the end going, okay, well, where do you go from here? Then it gets into this, well, there wasn't just two. And now there's further layers to this story. That's very hard to do, where you can take something and add so many layers to it, but at the same time as a reader be able to follow it, but question it. Because I read this, I went on a trip to South Carolina, and on the plane I went through and read the whole thing again. I didn't do it because I had to. I loaded it up on my iPad, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to put the volumes back on my iPad, because I clear off my iPad every so often after I'm done reading. I like having with Comixology, I can just start pulling a whole series back in. And I did something that I hadn't been able to do. I read it all in one sitting. So I read it on the plane.
That makes a difference.
It does. And it's nice to be able to read it again, knowing where it's going in the storyline, because I think you start analyzing certain events in a different way. That's where questions like Jim was mentioning earlier come up. I start looking at different characters that before maybe I wasn't so focused on because I was focused on Jeff. So it's great to see the supporting cast and really analyze them, because they do have a lot of interplay into what's going on, which I quite like as well. I'm a big fan of, if you want to make a world feel real, you can't just have a couple of characters spotlighted. You need to get to know everybody surrounding them, because they give you some insight into the main character as well. Our main characters in this particular case. That's stuff that I really liked. As an artist, I've seen you at conventions drawing, and I've really greatly enjoyed it, because it's clear that you love your craft and you constantly push yourself to grow as an artist. One of the things that I want to compliment in Fracture that I really enjoy, the dynamic character drama that goes on, because you'll have many panels, and this is something my favorite artists have, this quality where there's a lot of emotion being told through the way the character's moving, the way the character's expression changes. There's a lot of story. We're going to talk in a little bit about an upcoming project that you have, and it was the first time I got to see your comic work without the dialogue. And it's nice to be able to see that and try to figure out what's going on in the story. I realized just how much you deliver in the sense of character drama. Do you have trouble being the director in those moments where how do you get into that zone where you're kind of directing the scene? Because you really have a dynamic scene that unfolds on the page, and I really greatly enjoy that about your artwork.
To me, that's kind of where the creative process happens. There's a lot of technical things that I'm trying to do, and I'm nowhere near where I want to be as an artist, but there's, you have to know how to draw anatomy and figures, and the thing that I think I'm frankly weakest at as, perspective and backgrounds that I'm constantly trying to improve on. So when you're drawing a page, once you have it laid out, there's a lot of technical stuff of, okay, look, how am I going to render this hair? How am I going to make this background look correct and lead the eye around the page? But the point where you set up the page itself is at a rough stage at the beginning. When you're working, at least what I do is I draw the page as a whole on a small thumbnail. So at that stage, I'm not really concerned about the anatomy or how I'm going to render anything or the technical aspects of finishing the page. I'm just saying, all right, what's this panel going to look like? How is it going to lay on the page? How is it going to work the reader's eye around the page? And in that, you're drawing something 2 inches by 3 inches, and you're just kind of scribbling a stick figure or a bubble figure and just doing big squares and rectangles for the buildings in the background. That's where you have to try to stage everything and show what the action is going to be. And sometimes I literally draw big arrows, all right, the fist is coming this way and the cape is flying that way. to just try to make a dynamic presentation on the page. The toughest thing, the big action, the two things for me that are the toughest are the extreme scenes of action where you want the characters to just fly off the page. You want the punch to be the old kind of Stan Lee with the fist coming, or Jack Kirby with the fist literally hitting the reader in the face, or the other end of the spectrum where there's a few scenes in Fracture that are people sitting or standing around talking. And that's the hardest thing to make visually interesting, where it's kind of like over the shoulder, two shot, medium shot. It's hard to make a page where three people are standing in the lab talking for 2 pages really visually interesting.
One of my favorite scenes, talking about where it's emotional drama, we saw what was gradually happening with Virtue. And, we saw at the hospital, we had Sandy and Jeff hanging out there with Alex. They were visiting him. And she's excited to get home because, she's happy with her life. She wants to get back home to her family. We've got him waiting there in the dark for her. and the change in his demeanor, because following the story, when you think of Virtue, you think of as the dun-da-da, Superman kind of character in this world. We saw a gradual shift of the clone not quite being that guy.
He turns into the Punisher almost.
Yeah.
You, Jaywalker. Yeah, I'm sorry, you die.
And seeing what happens to Sandy in those moments when she shows up, I loved that drama, where you see the shift in his facial tone, you see the surprise on her face.
That page was a great challenge for me because I'm not one of these artists like is in a lot of vogue today that do a lot with deep spotted blacks and frame the page with a lot of negative space. I'm much more of kind of a silver bronze agey guy. I do line work and I try to make my lines sing as best I can and tell the story. But I thought that page really called for a lot of deep shadow just because of the psychology of what was going on there. So I had to try to put on a different artist hat for that particular page. Where she walks into that darkened room, I felt that page needs to be almost all black. So that was a real challenge for me just because of the art style.
Yeah, that had a nice creepy factor to it, and it's one of those things where you're just looking at it going, "Oh, this is not going to be good."
Oh yeah. Well, and there was another aspect of that scene that concerned me a little. In that you don't see it on panel, but the next scene, Sandy shows up looking pretty beat up, and I didn't want to make Sandy into just this victim and, just be another one. Well, the only purpose Sandy serves in the story is to get hurt and have the great hero rescue her. I really tried to have Sandy wanted to have Sandy be an affirmative actor in the story. She makes some important decisions in the story. She drives parts of the story by getting Jeff to the Dr. Atomic character. That's not Jeff's idea. That's Sandy's idea. So I had a little bit of a concern about, here we are, just the damsel in distress. She gets punched out by the kind of darkening character, but I hope it didn't come off in that way to make the Sandy character into just a 2-dimensional plot device. I really attempted to make her into a 3-dimensional affirmative actor in the story.
Oh God, no! Sandy was absolutely outstanding. She was as equally strong with the other heroes, the different fractures, and the various other characters. I really liked her and Jeff's relationship, their friendship, and just, especially a lot of the times when you drew her. We went from some moments when she had some really, looked really sexy, and you're like, whoa, and then you get the girl next door, your buddy friend, you get the, where she got smacked around a little bit. But I'm looking at that page right now, and she's like, something is wrong with Virtue. And you look at her, she's got, the beating. She's got some tear in her eye, but you see that resolve in her. And you see that strength, that she's not the sobbing, oh my God, what am I going to do? She's the character who's on par with Jeff, who's on par with Brian, saying, hey, we got to do something here. I love it. Was a nice combination of determination, but she doesn't get a hard edge, but she still has that strength of who she is. You did a beautiful job with this.
I'm really
this page.
I'm pleased to hear that. And the other point I would make about Sandy is, if you look back at the beginning of the story and realize Sandy isn't just the wife, because when Jeff makes his big reveal to her, it becomes clear it's not like she didn't understand. She wasn't like Lois Lane or whomever that knows but doesn't know. It becomes apparent she was somehow an active participant in this superheroic life they had, because she knew how to get in touch with Dr. Atomic. It's all off panel, but if you read between the lines, Sandy had to have been somehow active and involved in this, because she kind of understood what was going on. It wasn't like, oh, my husband is a superhero. No, she knew that.
Yeah, it's, again, another mystery into the how much does she know? How much is she involved in this?
Sure.
You know, I like that.
I like her as a mom, too. Like, she doesn't have the luxury of, you talked about, like, could she just crumble because of all this? Yeah, and I don't know that anyone would blame her, with what happened. Because that's very creepy and traumatic, what she went through.
Well, she doesn't have superpowers, as far as we know.
Right, exactly. Regardless of whether she did or she didn't, when you go through a trauma like that, especially with someone, there's an emotional violation because it's someone so close to you. But it's something I greatly admire about women that are moms, have this innate ability to be able to put their kids first. Where it's, in this situation, she's like, wait, we got a bigger priority here, and I need to deal with this right now. She kind of, it forces her to be stronger. I think in many ways, it's in some ways that I think that women are stronger than men in many, that mom instinct is something that I don't think as guys, we don't have that gene. Not that we have, the man up gene and all that kind of thing, but it comes from a different place than I think the mom Jean does. I love that quality about her. It's something that I greatly admire about the character, because she exhibits that. And
well, you see her reason and her sort of planning towards the end, after this happens, and they get the son, and they go to Dr. Atomic again, and the Jeff character is asking, are you sure this is a good idea? And she sort of spells out her reason. Well, this is probably the only person I know who could stop virtue if they had to, so this is the safest place for our son.
And I love that. I loved that whole aspect. And we get that reveal. It turns into this questioning.
I got asked, did you like the little robot dog in that scene? That was the most fun thing to draw in that entire issue. The little robot dog that the kid plays with.
You know what? I was fascinated by. Sony did those Ibos.
Yeah.
Like where you could buy those little... And I so wanted one. They were way out of my price range. I've always been fascinated through television. Like, I loved on Buck Rogers, Twiggy. I love K9 on Doctor Who. I always love robotic sidekicks. I just think that that's really such a cool thing. So I geeked out at seeing his whole lab in general, because that kind of techie gadgetry where they're companions, it says a lot about him, too. Because you don't see him... There's no... female companion or male companion, whatever his, preferences are, other than the fact that he keeps them in a tube. He really more prefers, and actually that alludes to this as well, he prefers the companionship of things that he's created, a lot of times, to actual people.
Well, he doesn't. It became clear to me he doesn't have a lot of sort of social graces. He does help them with various things, but he's kind of rude about it. Mm-hmm. He's not a great conversationalist. That whole thing of Jeff getting mad about, why didn't you tell us this? Well, you didn't ask me.
I think conveniently he did. That's where getting to know him, you can look at him a variety of different ways depending on what read through you are having on the book. Because
I'm refraining from saying, because I know a little bit more about his backstory than I think is revealed in the story. So I'm not going to. I don't know what exactly Sean has planned for that character in upcoming volume, but there's more to him than meets the eye.
From a reader's perspective, that's one of the cool things about the character, though, because I think that comes across richly in the story, especially when, if anybody listening to this has already read Fracture and hasn't read it a second time, I highly encourage that you do that at least a second time, because I found that in multiple read-throughs, it's fun to see that my viewpoint, thought process about characters, especially him, changes every time I read him. Little tweaks, not saying it's drastic, but there's little tweaks to what I'm thinking about him and where he might be going. And I think that's a mystery that you guys are intentionally developing with the character that is working richly on the page.
Well, thank you. And I'll tell you that the most fun part for me to draw was the last issue, and the return of, I guess we're doing spoilers, but the return of the prime mover from Volume 1, although not, if you think about it, not technically a return. It's really the first time we actually saw the Malice character, since in Volume 1 it was an imposter. It wasn't really Malice. It was the Kyle character masquerading as Malice. So when Jeff uses the pill to invoke Malice here in issue 4, that's really the first time we've seen Malice in the entire series, with the exception of perhaps maybe the first page of the series where Jeff wakes up in the Malice persona.
Yeah, I like the fact that we did get this great hero-villain battle. In the process,
was the most fun 2-3 pages to draw.
and in the process, we're rooting for the villain. I love that.
That's right. That was the whole point.
And that was a unique perspective, to root for the villain, because I literally was, through the entire battle, I wanted him to win. And I loved how he was looking at, he knew he had a limited time, and he knew that there were certain things he had to get done in that time. I love that not only did he kind of put a spanking to everybody, like who we've been seeing throughout, because him basically saying, "I want you, when we're done here, you're going to remember who Malice is and really what your role is." I loved that, because a good villain is one of those where you like them, but you shouldn't. and I like that
scene with the crocodile character where Malice just kind of shows up and almost just kind of brushes him aside. Wait, what is that? My bomb? No, this isn't how you do a bomb. This is how you do a bomb.
These sequences on the digital trade were, because the way because we talked earlier about how with just the layout and changing stuff around, I like the fact that I was clicking next page, and you get one panel, and it was the build on that single page, and especially in these fight sequences, and there was a couple stuff on some of the earlier stuff where you would do this. This was a neat effect. I'm normally a physical paper guy, but I've been getting more and more digital, when we do the show, that way I can have stuff up. And I gotta say, I really liked this issue in this format for this, especially for these fight sequences.
That's that, and I won't take credit for that staging. Someone other than me did the layout for digital and sort of made the selections. I drew the panels, but they decided the pacing in terms of, all right, this panel, then the next click will be that panel and that board balloon. But I agree, particularly for that scene you were talking about, the battle between Malice and Virtue, the digital presentation is very nice. But I love that page where Virtue kind of says, "Have it your way. You've got an hour. I can wait." And then she starts trying to pummel him. I tried to make it clear that was sort of the fight montage with the little kind of time entries. That was a difficult page to lay out because the sequence was there was supposed to be an epic battle that lasted like an hour between these two guys, with sometimes Virtue's brute force getting the upper hand and sometimes Malice's gadgets having the upper hand. And I only, because of the number of pages we had and the staging, I only really had 2 pages to do it. So I tried to use like a timer countdown and just a montage type of a layout. I think it worked. It was a fun page to draw, that's for sure.
Yeah, I want to pick up the physical copy because I want to see how this stuff is laid out, on the actual physical page.
Yeah, with the digital layout, you can't. I guess that's the only disadvantage of the digital layout. You can't pinch it down and see the whole page. When they're doing this cinematic panel by panel, you just get the panels. You don't get you can't pinch it down and see the whole page as it was in the comic. So that's why you all need to go out and buy a physical copy as well.
Yes, we do. Because I want to see how this. I want to see the experience, how it reads. If it reads differently, especially on some of the visual sides of this.
Here's something that you can look at closely on these pages with Malice. and it was an intentional thing that the colorists and I talked about. If you look at Malice and the way that Malice manifested in this issue, it was a quick change with that pill that Malice didn't really have time to plan out. So if you look at all these panels, he has the red hair of I guess, the wig that was slipped on, but his eyebrows are still blonde throughout this whole fight sequence. If you look closely at his eyes, his eyebrows are blonde. So he didn't have time to completely make the change to Malice.
Yeah, that's a nice attention to detail there.
Well, we tried.
I'm glad you guys gave him an epilogue. You know what I mean? Because you could have ended his story with the battle with Virtue. You know, with him, it could have gone there where I won, I finally beat Virtue, thank you, Jeff. You know, and you could have gotten that. To me, it was much more fulfilling to see this guy have a quote-unquote, what would be a villain's Sunday afternoon. You know, going and seeing what was done with his bomb and analyzing that. I loved seeing him pulling things out of the bomb, looking at it going, this was your master plan? I mean, I loved the look on his face, you know, kind of this really kind of attitude there. I really enjoyed seeing that sequence because...
You realize how kind of unimpressive the crocodile character was.
But to me, it also added to agreeing 100%. And when you do that as a storytelling tool, it makes the villain that much more impressive. And seeing that this guy really was the antithesis of Virtue. And that was something for us as the reader to be able to get to know that personality more. I think was a wonderful choice because I'm a fan of that. I think it makes the other characters that much more compelling when you get to know the villain. And in this scenario, it just works great because you can't help but wonder how some of this manifests in Jeff when we see him. And because you know these are fractures, these are split offs of his personality. As far as we know, how much of it is.
Well, yeah, exactly, and I like the coda at the very end, even after we see the Malice denouement or resolution. We also get the little tried and true psychiatrist couch with Jeff and his little coda as well. That was Sean setting everything up for Volume 3 when that comes out.
Yeah, I'm very eagerly looking forward to this because you guys have laid some great stuff. You know, just again, so the personal friendships that he's got going on with Sandy, relationship, no, we're just family. It's, you know, you see that buddy, but is there a possibility of something more? You've got the other fractures, and then you've got this massive bomb, this 8-block bomb that's sitting there that only the bad guy knows exists.
It's in a little time stasis whenever Malice gets the upper hand again. I like how he knows he's kind of going back. He doesn't have control of the Jeff body, and he knows he has an hour, but he very kind of calmly and patiently says, well, I'll just leave this here for when I get back out. I think the Malice we see here at the end of Volume 2 is very different than the imposter's portrayal of Malice in Volume 1, which was much more... I think the Kyle character in Volume 1 had perhaps a flawed understanding of what Malice was all about. He was much more just kind of Joker-like, being crazy and blowing stuff up and thinking Malice was just kind of out of control. And I think what we see here when the real Malice manifests himself at Jeff's, when Jeff allows the real Malice to manifest himself, you see the true power of Malice's calculation, and Malice is Lex Luthor. Malice is not the Joker.
Oh, definitely a Lex there. And I was saying Lex is one of, if not my favorite villains out there. I like the intellectual villain. I like that, you know, and we get to see Brains did beat Brawn here. So this is definitely a really cool character, and the fact that he seems to have a better grasp of the concept of the fractures and how to use and manipulate Jeff, you know, is something that, you know, future stories we could get some kind of really neat stuff coming from here.
Well, I really love the way that Malice gets the upper hand on Virtue.
Yeah.
By playing on the fact that he's smarter than Virtue and he can completely dupe him. By walking into that tube and disappearing and Virtue jumps in and tries to use the teleportation device that he knows it is. And then Malice reappears and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. You thought that was the teleporter? No, that's my coat. You're in a disintegration tube." What?
Yeah, that was awesome. I was rooting for the villain, and it even just afterwards, there was some cool smirky, kind of grins on his faces you were putting there, and it was that, just that, I got you, kind of. I don't want to say jovial because it wasn't, but it was just that you could see Malice was having fun with what he was doing, and he was enjoying the destruction of Virtue, and the fact that he was doing it for the right reasons made it all that, man.
He wasn't doing it for the right reasons. He was serving Jeff's purpose, but right. Malice wasn't doing it for the right reasons. No way.
With things like Alex, and I really don't want to gloss over this because I really enjoyed that. I liked that we saw Jeff Fall wake up as somebody else. Alex later winds up in the hospital, and we don't really know 100% what happened. Those choices, like when you guys are doing that, do you...
Well, I will tell you, you should go back and read the book very carefully because I believe you can piece together what happened to Alex from the clues that are on the page.
Because here's what I took it, that it was Vice who popped in. When he hit his head, that it was Vice. Because in the hospital, he says he saw a flash of light. And I don't know exactly how he got shot. That I'm still trying to figure out. But I took it that, got up and zapped him. And...
Well, I'll only say this. There are gunshots in this book that may be the ones that harmed Alex.
Nice.
I probably just gave it away, but we did try to leave a clue for that.
And see, I love stuff like that. I'm here's the worst part. I'm like paging through right now trying to find it, which I'm endlessly guilty of when we do these because I love paging through the pages. Besides the Alex sequence, the one that I want to make sure we don't miss either that I really enjoyed was Lucas. Lucas with the doctor. He's doing what a kid does. He comes across all of that, and that was a scene for me. I didn't get a chance to mention how much I enjoyed that, because that was really creepy uncle. He's sitting down there with the kid, "Hey, look what you found, and this is going to be, basically hitting at, this is our little secret." I'm anxious to see where that goes, because the kid knows something now, and how comfortable is the doctor going to be with him having seen something? Did he already do something to the kid? Will he do something with the kid because the kid knows this? Or will the kid reveal it? Those are mysteries that I like seeing in the book because I want to know more about where that's going to go. And
there's a lot of loose ends for story possibilities for later volumes. I can assure you of that. There's the Lucas aspect, there's what's the doctor doing with a room full of clones aspect. There's when is Malice going to get back out. There's what's the relationship between Jeff and Sandy. Is Virtue truly gone? By extracting him from Jeff and putting him in the clone body, did the doctor eliminate him from Jeff? Is Virtue still in there somewhere? We don't know any of this stuff.
It's funny, and you mentioned that he has, 5 volumes, you said, plotted?
I believe he said either 5 or 6.
Okay.
That he kind of knows what the story would be.
Part of the realities of this world is, even in 6 volumes, are you going to get every loose end tied up? Because there's, and I don't mean that in the sense of a creative thing on your end. This world's got so much going on. There's certain things that we as the reader are supposed to figure out for ourselves. And it's something I really enjoy about the story, where there's going to be things that are clearly meant to be there as loose threads that lead into story development that is going to come down the road. Cool. But I think there's other things that we're meant to kind of explore in our head, or maybe have hinted at in what's going on in the story, so we discover it ourselves along the way. When you got a story with that much depth, it's one of the things that I really love about the serialized delivery of comics. The fact that you get these things delivered monthly, or in the case of, when I did this, when I did it digitally through the, I liked the little, I'm a big fan of when Comixology has these little short delivery pieces of books where you get them and you can kind of read sometimes I'll stockpile them and read 2 or 3 of them at once. Other times the second that they come out, I plop it on my device and start reading them. It depends on what I've got going on at the time. But I really like the option of being able to get this kind of snippet look into a book and then going back and reading it completely when it's done. Because I just think it's just a different way. I look at it as it's the new newsstand. Because we've got a rich direct market, but I'm hoping that eventually digital becomes like, and there's no other way to kind of think of it, a new version of the newsstand. Like it brings in a different sort of audience than just us, the normal comic fans, because it's a different sort of delivery. And I'm hoping that it becomes like the new newsstand, because I think we need that in the comics medium. And I just love the experimentation of different delivery methods in digital right now, I think is the way to go. Try to figure out what sticks. What are people buying more of? Which way do they seem to be digesting it digitally?
Yeah, everybody's predicting gloom and doom for the printed comic book, but I really don't see any reason why they can't coexist for an extended period of time. Some people like to read paper comics, and other people like to read digital comics, and some people like to read both. I don't see why the bottom necessarily has to fall out of comic book shops selling floppy comics, or at the very least trades. The fact that there's a Kindle doesn't mean I never want to walk in a bookstore again.
Right. And I'm a believer that the only way those things are going to die out is if we, who are the fans of the paper versions, stop buying the paper. We just get to the point where we prefer the digital delivery. Well, then, yeah, of course it'll die out, but at least we still have our comics. But on the other hand, I think my newsstand comparison, the reason why I like that, I don't think we have, I know we don't have yet the rich casual crowd that the newsstand brought in. I had friends of mine growing up that were newsstand readers, and what I mean by that was they weren't guys that had to, every time they go to a shop, grab a comic. If they were by the spinner rack and they saw a cover that captivated them, they would take it home and they would read it. And that might be, one of 3 comics they get the whole year. But they were people that were grabbing comics and liked the medium, but they were casual. We need the casual fan, too, in comics. And those can a lot of times graduate to being a full-fledged comic fan. The only way you do that, though, is if you have a casual market, because people have got stuff on their devices, they've got stuff, lying around. They start talking about these cool things that they ended up picking up on a whim. I'm hoping that digital becomes the new newsstand, and that's where I think it will benefit paper, digital, whatever version, by creating new readers, because that's what we really need. Our top sales numbers in comics right now, I'm talking about, your highest selling books, those numbers, I think they're disgusting for the quality of comics out there right now. Comics, I think we got a renaissance right now of really creative material out there. If you don't like something, your choices are so rich on what to jump off to. It's a great time.
Preaching the choir here, mister.
And I just figured out how Alex got shot. I just saw it. Dude, that's outstanding. I'll tell you, I completely missed it the first time. Beautiful job with that.
Well, tell Sean off the mic.
Yeah.
Don't. I'm gonna go back and read it.
Okay.
I actually want to. I love spoilers and stuff, but in this particular case, this book, I like the discovery. It's funny how this, we're talking spoilery about this book a lot, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Because for me, it's been the first volume I read 4 times. I will do that with this volume as well. The reason why I did it is I found that I was discovering new things every time that I went through from different perspectives. It's the same thing with this, and I found that I really enjoy reading my comics over and over again. It's fun to have dialogue and discussion about the events of the story. It's one of the things I like about doing a spoiler podcast, because we can get kind of heady on this. I like knowing that I missed something here, in this discussion, because I want to go back through and see that. And sometimes you don't discover those things unless you're talking to other people that have read the book and been a party to the book. I think that's where nowadays having the internet and having the ability to talk on Skype and having, groups on social media, we have the ability to really talk about and enjoy comics and get a lot of value from our purchase by kind of embracing and sharing that. And I'm glad to see more of that happening on the internet, because for a while it seemed like you'd go into, forums and it was just a bunch of complaining, and I'm like, where are the fans? Now I think we've got a really rich crowd of comic fans that want to dialogue and talk about the material. This is really, as a kid growing up, this kind of stuff's what I always wanted to do with comics. And you when you hit a friend every so often that you could do this with, what a great discussion it was. Nowadays, we have a playground of people to hang out with and chat about stuff like Fracture. And have a good time talking about the things that we missed or how we're seeing characters differently. Because even in this discussion, you're a creator on the book. Jim and I read the book, and really, when we talked about certain characters, there was 3 different perspectives on what we think may or may not be happening with certain characters. And I think in certain cases we wound up in the middle. Other cases, there may be, in another read-through, I might look at certain characters now in a completely new way, independent of our discussion. That's rich. I mean, I love that kind of stuff.
Well, hey, I know I have a little peek behind the curtain, but Sean hasn't laid out volumes 3 through 6 for me just yet, so I don't know what the ultimate outcome of this, and I probably have a step or two past you guys in terms of knowing a little bit more about what's going on in some of the backstory, but I'm discovering it just sort of ahead of the crowd.
When you do the pages for Fracture, I know a lot of times, you'll sometimes get, because you're working with certain characters, do you go chronologically whenever you're drawing this? Or are there times where, you're working on, because you mentioned earlier that you have to look at them as independent characters. So do you ever do like the Virtue parts, then go back and do the Jeff parts, or do you do it all together? Or how does your process work, I guess, when you're doing pages on a book?
I might skip around a little bit when I'm doing layouts, but I'll lay out a whole issue before I start doing finished pencils and inks. And for pencils and inks, my process on Fracture was to pencil the whole issue and then ink the whole issue. So I would be penciling page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, and then once I had finished pencils, I would then go back and ink from page 1 through. And I did the issues sequentially because the timing. I'm a relatively slow artist. It takes me, because I'm doing both pencils and inks, and the fact that I have a day job, I'm not a full-time artist. It takes me 3 months plus to do a single issue. So because we obviously wanted to have issue 1 finished so it could start the layout pre-press process as I was finishing issue 3, I did the issues sequentially. So I would do layouts for the whole issue, and then I would circulate those to Sean and Dave Dornch, the creative director, and typically the 3 of us would get on the Skype and go through, because at the layout stage it's easy to change things or fix things. It's more effort once you've penciled something to go back and fix it. So I would do detailed thumbnail layouts for the whole issue, send them to Sean and Dave. We would Skype and walk through, make this a little bigger. That's not how it should work. Make the action go left to right or whatever. And then I would just pencil sequentially 1 through 22 or 24, and then ink 1 through 2 and 20. Now, I'm trying to move to a fully digital process, and I'm doing it a little differently now, but we can talk about that once we're done talking about Fracture.
With the layouts on how you were doing it on the page, that fascinates me because I'm not an artist. I'm the fan, and I have no urge to create comics, and what I mean by that is I want to be your audience. I want to be the guy that you're selling to. I want to be the guy that you're pitching interesting stories to, in the sense that you're pitching to me as the reader, hey, buy my story because you find something of interest in it. But I'm fascinated by the behind the scenes. So when you're talking about layouts, I'm like, oh, that makes sense, because if you do the layouts at first, you as the director get a chance to kind of make sure that you get everything in a pace that makes sense to you. But then you can have, like you said, the rich discussions about, is this the way you guys see it? And, is everything, are we all feeling good about the pace of this particular issue? Which I would imagine you need that before you can do the heavy lifting of, okay, now I really need to nail this down and put in the fine details that everyone needs to see in order for this to be.
Well, it's a very practical reason why you do the layouts first, because you're working with a writer, and our creative director Dave was a part of it, and the first thing I lay down on the page might not work because Sean knows more about the whole backstory and everything than I do as the writer. I might put something down on the page as part of the background or some incidental piece of action that screws up something he wanted to do, or he might need me to put something in the background. So it takes 20 seconds for me to do a 2x3 thumbnail of, all right, the character's going to punch this way, there's going to be a desk back here, or whatever. So if I get on the phone and Sean says, no, it needs to be this way, that's not a huge investment of my time to scrap that and redo that page. But it takes me 2 days to pencil a page. So if I just go in and fully pencil something and Sean says, it doesn't work, you got to fix it, I've just lost 48 hours. So there's a practicality behind why we do it that way.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we as the readers benefit, though, because that's where everything kind of tightly comes together, so that the issue has the kind of pacing and the delivery that guides us through the story, because we really want to be riding along with our main characters in the story. I really liked that about Fracture, because I really found that with the fact that there's the blackouts and certain things going on, I found myself being pulled into the book where I felt like I was inside the story and sitting on the couch watching, instead of being outside it. And I've, as a fan and as a reader of comics, I read a lot of comics each month. I have both experiences, and there's a point to both experiences. But I greatly appreciate the stories where I feel like I want comics, and they always do this for me. I love my job. I love everything I do. And I think one of the reasons why I love my job is the fact that I can come home and watch a television show. I can read a great comic, and it kind of takes me away from everything that I've been doing. I read comics every night, and it tends to be something that I do, usually before I go to sleep at night. I'll pull out a few comics, I'll sit down and read, and just really enjoy that experience. It gets me kind of in a happy place for the next day, because I'm not thinking about work when I'm doing this, which we all need that.
I share that exactly. I don't get to read as many comics as I want, but for my day job, I do some business travel. I don't know if I mentioned, I'm sitting in a hotel room right now. I've been on a 4-day business trip, so I've got my iPad with comics on it, but I'll throw 6 trades in my bag when I'm traveling for more than one day. So I'm sitting in a hotel room in a town, I don't know anybody, I had business meetings, so I'm in my hotel room at 7 o'clock. I don't like watching TV all evening. I read trades, and then I draw on my tablet. So I read the six. Have you heard of Six Gun Gorilla?
Mm-hmm.
I read that trade last night, and I closed that trade, and I was like, that was an amazing comic. That was like a great experience for me to just sit here and for an hour and a half read that cover to cover, and the story was amazing, the art was amazing. That is why I love comics right there. That trade was just a wonderful experience.
We went to South Carolina for my wife's 40th, and it was a chance to get away and go on a trip. And we went to Charleston and Myrtle Beach. On both legs of the trip, we knew that we were going to get tired at certain points because we had really packed itineraries on the day of the things that we really wanted to do. So there were certain days where we sat down, kind of set aside some time either to go to the beach or just to take a couple hours in the hotel room to kick back and relax. And, that was my comic reading time. It's so great to be able to sit down during that time, just kind of uninterrupted. And because I don't have a lot of that time now where it's completely interrupted where I can read like a whole trade.
That's the same for me.
That experience.
That's why I buy the trades and I throw them in my bag when I'm coming on a business trip, because, I like spending time with my family when I'm home and hanging out with my kids, and then I'm drawing. So getting that hour and a half to sit there and just read a trade cover to cover, that's why these business trips aren't murder. I get to just sit here and read some comics in my hotel room.
And I think that's one of the healthy things about having hobbies and having interests. You need those things to be able to escape. So people like you, and you spend all this time, you talked about, it takes me about 3 months to put together an issue because I'm doing this aside from my day job. I thank you for that because I loved Fracture, and that type of stuff really improves my whole outlook. I think I'm more productive at work because of the fact that, I have this escape that is really so enjoyable and mesmerizing. The time that I spent with Fracture being pulled into its rich world was really beneficial to me. I really enjoy the world of Fracture, so I can't wait to see where this story's headed. It's like one of the great things about them being released in volumes. It's like waiting for the movie. And I like that comics. There's some comics that come out every month. There's some comics that come out in volumes. I like both delivery options. I think it's just fantastic that we have the choice to be able to read so many different delivery methods. Because growing up, we didn't have so many options that we have now. That's why I think it really, for people that get crabby with comics, I just don't get it. It's like, are you really that horrible at picking a pull list that you can't realize that, like, if I'm not enjoying these 3 books, maybe I should try like the 700 others that are available now.
There you go.
Is there anything else that you want to say about Fracture that I missed? Or Jim, is there anything that I hope I got a chance to get to everything that you wanted to discuss as well?
Oh yeah. This looks really beautiful. This is a great looking book. I just want to make sure I had a point in time when I did get to tell you that, because as I said, there's some cool superhero stuff, but I really liked how you drew the human interactions, and just, especially that Sandy character. That's a really great female character. I'd like to see more of her in issues and, future stuff.
Like I said, I'm not yet where I want to be as an artist. I want to keep continuing to improve my work. And I think I've told you before, when we first talked, my inspirations are, Adam Hughes, Kevin McGuire, Art Adams, those type of things. So I want to draw those expressive faces and character acting. And I think looking back on Fracture, you can see some of my progression as an artist through Volume 1 and Volume 2, and I hope to continue that. I think if you look at Volume 2, Issue 4, it's slightly different than Volume 2, Issue 1, because it takes me a long time to do it. You can watch, at a meta level, in addition to the story, you can watch my evolution as an artist right on the page in front of you.
I'm a teacher, and one of the things that I think is very true of teaching is that once you think you're perfect, you need to get out of the profession. You're not doing anyone good anymore.
Oh, yeah.
I think the same thing applies to comic art. And what I mean is, my favorite artists, I look, and it's my favorite artists right now, stories that I'm really enjoying. I echo Jim's comments, because one of the things I really liked on this trip, I downloaded, again, my issues 1 through 3 of the first Fracture, and I read that through. Just because I wanted to. I knew we were only talking Volume 2. I knew we weren't going to talk Volume 1, but I'm like, I just kind of want to go back and enjoy the whole experience all the way through. I'm a fan of that. But I think my favorite artists all the way through are people that I really enjoyed watching their progression. There was something about their storytelling that touched and resonated with me, that has drawn me to their artwork and their storytelling skills, because I think that's a key part to my favorite artists in comics. It's the people that can tell a story with their art and know how to kind of cast that. But I love seeing that even now, there's artists that have been doing this their entire life, majority of their life, I should say, that have been in it, and they still push themselves. Like, they're still exploring. They're trying something new. You'll see some new visual effect or something that they try on a certain page. Some way they're doing the backgrounds with a little compelling tweak or something, because they're playing around with it. I think once you lose that passion for pushing yourself further, I think you lose the artistry of what makes comics so great, because there's a real artistry to this, and I get captivated by seeing that every month. I like reading a lot of different comics, because there's a lot of different style techniques and aesthetics that people are doing. And that's the stuff that I really enjoy about being a part of this medium. It's the dialogue, the drama that's told by the artistic talent. I mean, it's just great stuff.
I'm with you.
Now, one of the things that you were kind enough to send us is a preview of a work in progress. You have a new book that you're currently working on. And I'm really interested to talk to you about this because, you know, when it comes to pitching comics, we've never really had the opportunity to talk to somebody who's in the process of, you know, we've got this great idea. We're, you know, kind of fleshing it out, and we're going to publishers to shop it around. What is that like? How did this get started, this new project that you're in the process of working on right now? What was the genesis of this?
Well, for me, I talked, after we finished Volume 2 of Fracture, I talked to Sean, and we both kind of mutually decided, well, we're not going to immediately go right into Fracture Volume 3, because I had basically drawn Volume 1 and then drawn Volume 2, and I'm slow enough that I had been working on Fracture for pretty much 2.5 years to do the 7 issues that have ended up being out at this point. So we fully intend to come back to Fracture, but we both wanted to work on something else for a short period of time in the interim anyway. Obviously, Action Lab's involved in the decision as to when the next volume of Fracture will come out, and we wanted to see what the sales figures were and talk to them about it as well. So I didn't have anything else in the works, so I literally kind of went out to a couple of forums. There's web forums for artists and where artists and writers hang out. There's one of the ones I like is called Pencil Jack, where you can post up art and get critiques from people and find, you know, collaborators or colorists or things. So I literally made a post up there that says, I'm a comic artist. I'm looking for a new project. Are there any writers who'd be interested in working on something creator-owned with me? And I think and I got a number of people who sort of reached out to me and kind of pitched me like, yeah, I'd like to work with you. And I think I had a little bit of a hook in that. I think one of the real problematic things for a writer in finding an artist to work on is a lot of artists aren't in the position that I am, that I have a good day job and I'm not really looking to become a full-time comic artist. I want to develop as an artist, but I know I'm not going to be picked up by Marvel and make my living as an artist. I don't want to do that. I don't aspire to do that. So I put in my post, I'm not looking for a page rate. I'm looking to collaborate with you and co-own something that we both create together. And I think that's a little bit different than a lot of the artists out there, because writers are stuck. If they're a writer and they have an idea, they got to find an artist. A lot of artists are looking for a page rate. If you're a writer, that's a big problem for you if you don't have, you know, $5,000 sitting around to pay an artist. So I think I was able to get a little bit of attention from some folks when I said I'm not looking for a page rate. So I got a number of emails from writers who were looking for collaborators, and a guy named Dino Caruso contacted me and told me he had a couple of story ideas in the works, and we talked back and forth on email about some of them, and I kind of picked the one that interested me, which was a science fiction murder mystery with Western overtones.
I love
it. I'll tell you the reason I picked it was because I haven't done anything in the science fiction genre, and I wanted to challenge myself, to push myself to another level of most of the stuff I've done, even Fracture and the stuff I did before that for PKD Media with Mercury and the Murd and other miscellaneous things I've done. It's mostly all contemporary stuff, like superhero, but I'm still drawing buildings and cars, and it's set in our current day. So aside from the capes, I'm drawing a present-day, real-world comic. Mercury and the Murd was a police buddy cop, so I was drawing in my style back at the time, but I was drawing, you know, buildings and police cars and things like that. I've never gotten to draw sort of futuristic guns and aliens and what would buildings look like if they were a colony on another planet, and what does a hover speeder look like, and what kind of spaceship does this culture use. So I really wanted to challenge myself on some different types of character designs, some alien character designs, you know, uniforms for people in the future, and what would a space colony look like. So that's really kind of why I picked it. And the writer, Dino Caruso, I think he's published a couple of horror things through, he had a book out through Marcosia, and he's done 1 million stories in anthologies over the last 5 years. So he's kind of an up-and-comer, just like I am. And he sent me a breakdown, an outline, and we talked back and forth, and I said, you want to work Marvel style? Because I'd love to try that. I haven't done that. So that's how we were doing this. He sent me a detailed outline for issue 1, and then kind of paragraph outlines for issues, a couple of issues beyond that. And I spent about a month and a half or 2 months in March and April doing some detailed character designs and going back and forth, and some environment designs, much more detailed work than I had done on any of my previous stuff, on character designs and costume designs and who's going to look like what. And then I just started doing layouts and breakdowns for issue 1, and I also decided I wanted to try to make the switch to working digitally. And really the only reason I did that was because I do some travel for my business, and I have, once every couple of months I'm gone for 3 or 4 days. I didn't want to lose that time. So unless I transitioned to working digitally and was able to draw my books on a tablet, I'd be here in a hotel room while my art sat on my drawing board on a big piece of paper, and there's nothing I do about it for 4 days while I'm out of town. So that sort of spurred me to, I got a little better tablet, a Wacom tablet computer that has that Wacom drawing technology that I can cart with me. So after we're done talking tonight, I'm literally going to pull up a page and draw comics until I go to sleep tonight.
How has that shift been for you? Is there a challenge to doing and working with the different medium?
It's a little bit of a learning curve, figuring out how to produce the marks on the page, but you're holding a stylus that's like holding a pencil, and you're drawing on a surface that, although you have to get used to a little bit of a tactile difference between the tip of a pencil or the tip of a pen feels a certain way when it drags across a piece of paper. The tip of a brush or a dip pen or whatever feels a certain way when it drags across a piece of paper, and you get a tactile response in your fingers and your hand that you use as an artist to learn how it feels to draw a curve, how it feels to draw what type of pressure you need. So it's a little bit of a learning curve, figuring out how to mimic that with a stylus on a smooth piece of glass, essentially. The Wacom tablets allow you to get different stylus tips, and I use kind of a rubber one that gives you a little bit of drag. I don't know if you've ever held a stylus on a Wacom tablet, but the hard plastic ones, it's like rubbing your fingernail across a mirror. You get very little friction, and that's kind of a different feeling than dragging a pencil, the graphite tip, across a piece of paper. So there's a learning curve. Your hand just kind of knows inherently, once you've drawn for thousands of hours as an artist, like that graphite feel, you can sort of flow across the page. And you've seen artists get into that zone where they're just kind of sketching, that sort of magical feeling of the artist is in a different place. Part of that is that their hand knows what the piece of paper feels like. Their fingertips know what that graphite moving across a piece of Bristol feels like, and it allows the artist to get to that zone. You have to relearn that a little bit with a piece of plastic rubbing across a piece of glass, but if you can get past that, you can make the same mark. Your hand will figure that out. Your mind figures that out. And once you learn the program, I use something called Manga Studio rather than Photoshop. I mean, the thing I sent you, I was surprised after a couple of weeks playing around with it, because I had a digital tablet and I had played around with it a little bit, but I never got to the point where I drew a lot on it. I was surprised how closely. I mean, I went back and looked at some of my quote-unquote pencils, and I'm like, this doesn't look that different from a scan of what I was doing before. I was surprised how closely I could mimic my output.
It's cool.
The traditional.
I'm looking at this, and I don't want to get too spoilery with it, but one of the things I really greatly admire here, I'm a big sci-fi fan, and I think where I connect with you, and it's something I really enjoy about talking to you, with the fact that you're part-time and you're looking for experiences that can push you as an artist, and you have a chance to grow and to try things in a way that you haven't before, to see where you can take yourself. every artist that we've had an opportunity to talk to on the show, artists that I've met at conventions, I've had a chance to sit down with and talk to, everyone's a little bit different in, what their story is and what their goals are. And I think that's that's what makes it true art. I love when I'm looking through this, just seeing the landscapes that you're creating here, because you're really clearly playing around with an experience of reminding people that you're on alien worlds. You're in different places than you are on Earth. So, I clearly see your style here, but I'm also seeing wow, this is different than what we're seeing in Fracture, where it's very grounded in a reality. Whereas this is, but now we're taking you off the planet. We're taking you to a different time. We're taking you to a different technology level than what you're used to before. And I really love the experience of looking through this, because I don't have the dialogue. I don't have the chance to see any of that, but I'm just paging through, your work in progress for this. And it is gorgeous. I'm really excited to read this.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that digital has allowed me, and echoing back to my prior point, on this thing that I sent you, if you look at the first page, not the cover, but the first sequential page, that's traditional artwork. That's the scan of a piece of paper. But starting on page 2, that's all digital. None of that was done on a piece of paper. So you tell me how much of a difference you see. I don't see that much.
No. As a matter of fact, I think the telling point is when you see characters who are on that first page, on the second one, it's very clear to me who everyone is.
Yeah.
Which that's where, if there's going to be something jarring, is that the same guy or not?
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind.
And that's one thing I'm working very hard on, because I think that's a legitimate criticism of my art in the past, and I think I got better at this during Fracture Volume 2, is repetition of characters and recognizability of characters. One of the hardest things, at least for me as an artist, and I've heard other artists say this, so I think I'm not uncommon in this, is I can draw a face. I can draw a pretty face or an ugly face or a woman's face or a man's face and make it look like a woman's face or a man's face or an old face or a young face. It's an entirely another matter to draw the same face again and again and again and make it look the same from side view, from a front view. A face is a very complex shape. It's, the anatomy and kind of the numbers of the eyes should be one eye length apart and halfway up the skull or whatever. But it's another matter from saying that and drawing the same face for 22 pages with the mouth open, with the mouth closed, the eyes looking left, the eyes looking right, sad, happy, and make it look like the same person. That is one of the hardest things that I have found to do, and I'm really working hard to try to do that. So it's gratifying to hear you say, well, I can recognize the people on page 2 are the same people on page 1. But the point I was going to make, that one thing digital does help with, and one of the tools in the program that I'm using, Manga Studio, is it helps make the perspective lines easier. Like when you're drawing a room, you got to make the lines converge to a point if you're using so-called one-point perspective, and make the lines parallel and make it look like a room and a table sitting in a room. That's not trivial. It's not brain surgery, but it's not a trivial thing to do. There's a lot of work with, a lot of the new rougher artists do that just without a ruler, but I've always been an artist who does ruler lines and stuff and make my lines look straight. It's very easy to do that, so it makes that quicker and easier digitally. And the other thing it's allowing me to do is create greater depth of field. Like there's some panels here, I don't know if you want to look down kind of the 4th or 5th page, there's a scene where there's a bunch of people in what appears to be kind of a corporate office talking at a view screen with some aliens on it. If you look at one of the panels on that page, there's kind of 4 or 5 levels of depth there. There's the woman in the foreground, some people behind her, some people 20 feet behind them, behind a transparent view screen, in front of a window behind which you see a cityscape. That's kind of 5 levels of depth, which ain't easy to lay out and figure out how it works. And to do that on a page is really hard. Doing work digitally allows you to kind of set up layers, if you've heard people talk about this,
yes,
so that you can kind of draw the foreground and then make it disappear and draw the middle ground by itself and then pop the foreground back on and then make that disappear and draw the 3rd level and then draw the 4th level, draw the 5th level, and then pop the layers back on and make sure they work together. that's something that's much easier to do, at least for me, digitally, than it is to kind of lay out and construct on a piece of paper. You either have to draw that all at once and be some kind of genius to put everything exactly in perspective on top of things behind it, or you can do that on paper, just draw the foreground character and scan it, and then draw the midground and scan it. But that's really time and effort intensive. So working digitally really helps if you have more complex layouts, which I have in some of the pages here. So it allows you to add a kind of a level of sophistication without pulling your hair out.
And I appreciate that as a fan, because when you take a look at that page, I was marveling at it as you were talking, the sheer amount of depth that you see. Because I'm always fascinated by not having an artistic background, other than the fact that I've been a fan my whole life. But there's a huge difference between being a fan and being an actual artist and doing that. I always appreciate when there's pages where I can look at them and you take something that's very flat and you give this sense of vastness. I think it's something that I think is an amazing thing to be able to do to that kind of depth. And I love that kind of stuff. It's what makes me look at page. I'll sometimes sit with a page. After I've done my first read through, I'll go back through, and I tend to read through the book with a certain amount of depth the first time through. Then I go back through like the second time and do kind of like a page through, where I'm looking at the art, and it's fun to hit certain pages where I'm like, oh, I want to take a look at this now. Where I can just focus on the art and take a look at it.
I share that as well, and I've always loved those kind of pages, and that's one thing that I've had difficulty with as I developed as an artist. I aspire to that, but it's hard to get to a point where you can do that and make it visually pleasing and visually believable at the same time. You can see it in your mind's eye, but putting it down on the page is sometimes difficult until you develop a skill level. And I'm not there yet, but getting closer. So I think some of the pages and panels in this project have more believability than stuff I was even doing in Fracture Volume 2. And some of that is I'm getting better as an artist, and some of it is I think these tools are helping me do some things that I struggled with before, and we'll see how the end product comes out. But the colorist that we're going to use on this project is going to have to do some heavy lifting here, because there's the tentative title is Blue Hour, and it takes place mainly on a human colony on an alien world that has two suns, one of which is a yellow sun and one of which is a blue sun. And the blue hour is the local term for when the yellow sun has set but the blue sun is still up, such that the lighting conditions change, and there literally is kind of a blue hour on this planet where everything sort of turns blue when the yellow sun goes down.
Oh, cool.
And the local superstition is that bad stuff happens during the blue hour.
That's cool. Now, is this going to be, obviously it's a limited series?
Yeah,
do you guys have an idea?
The plan is for 6 issues right now,
Okay.
which is a longer series than I've done. I'm hoping working digitally will allow me to go a little faster. It hasn't on this first issue, but I had a pretty big learning curve, so I'm hoping on the later issues I'll be able to go faster working digitally. But the plan is for 6 issues. We don't have a publisher yet. I'm one of the owners of Action Lab, but I don't get to automatically publish my own books. So I have to, if we want to go with Action Lab, I have to submit to the editorial review just like anybody else. The only thing I get as one of the owners is they'll look at it. So we haven't really decided exactly where we're going to pitch it yet. We hope it's worthy of publication. The plan is we're going to complete issue 1 so that we have a full completed issue to pitch, and along with synopses of the rest of the story, we'll then submit it and see what the future is for the project. But it's a very interesting story. I mean, it's basically about human nature. One of the characters here is trying to. The 2 main characters are war buddies that were friends during a resource war on planet Earth, and things are getting bad here on the planet. So one of them achieves some wealth and power and decides he's going to head up a big project to start the first autonomous human colony off of the Earth. and they find this planet with an indigenous population and negotiate to start a colony there. And he's really trying to create this sort of utopia to overcome what he sees as the frailties of human nature. And one of the issues is whether you can do that or not.
Is there a rule of thumb as far, because you were talking about how you guys want to get the first issue done in order to pitch it? Is there a rule of thumb as far as how you pitch a mini-series or a series, as far as or is that kind of from project to project that's different? How does that work? Because I'm fascinated by that.
Depends on the project and the publisher. I have a little bit of inside information on this. Being one of the owners of Action Lab, I've seen how people pitch projects. I'm not on the editorial committee, but I do see some pitches, or early on I saw more of the pitches, and it varies pretty widely. Some people bring a finished comic and say, look, I've got a 3-issue series, it's in the can, it's done. Do you want to publish this? Here it is, read it. Some people come in with a synopsis and art samples. Here's a set, here's 8 pages of character designs and 2 pages of sequentials, and here's a 4-paragraph synopsis of the story. If you read or publish this, we'll produce it. Other people have anything in between. We have 2 issues of a 4-issue series completed, and here's what we've got, and would you publish this? And it also depends on the publisher. If you're going to publishers that do books in-house, you might be pitching something where the publisher would pay for artists and writers and put the thing together. But Action Lab does mostly creator-owned stuff, and this would be a creator-owned project. So it varies pretty widely of what people have. And some publishers would have guidelines that say, we need to see 10 sequential pages and a 4-page plot synopsis or whatever. But it varies, really.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Our intent is to just have kind of a proof of concept here with having the first issue pretty much done. And I'm closing in on that. I'm almost done with the pencils and inks. The other thing I'm doing digitally, a little different than I have done before, is I'm really not separating the pencil and ink stage. I'm going from roughs to inks all in one kind of fell swoop. And digital sort of lets me do that because I can pencil out things that need to be tightly penciled on a different layer and then just fade that down to almost transparency and then ink right over top of it. So I'm really kind of consolidating the pencil and ink stages as I work digitally. That's hopefully will help me condense the timing of it.
One of the things I really liked in what you sent us, we had an opportunity to see different stages of where the art's at.
Yeah.
So and it was cool to see in your roughs, like, oh, I know who that character's going to be.
Yeah.
Which I don't get, the opportunity to see very often unless, sometimes you'll see like a digital extra and something like that where they'll show some of like a page or 2 sampling of what this looks like. I really appreciated this because knowing you like I do and having seen you draw at a table at a convention before, it's cool to be able to see, oh wow, so this is how he's going to get from A to, and I don't want to say A to B because there's so many different letters in the alphabet that you have to go through in order to get it to the finished product that we're seeing on some of the other pages. It's neat to see your process and how you build in layers to what you're doing. It's cool.
The other thing I did was very intentional and calculated on my part. There's a number of characters. There's probably 8 or 10 characters that you might call central to this, and really only 5 or 6 of them are introduced in the first issue that you have seen a rough cut of. But I really made the attempt in designing these characters to make them as dissimilar from one another visually as possible, so that even in long shots or silhouettes or whatever I decide to do for layouts, they're always distinguishable. Like, I made one of them kind of heavyset and bald, and the other one kind of skinnier but balding, but clearly, even if you see a shot only from the side, from far away, you would distinguish them. And there's several women characters and as female characters, and one of them's tall and skinny with dark hair and is going to look Asian, and one of them is short and blonde, and then there's another one who's kind of short, but she's going to have red hair and a very different hairstyle. So I really tried to make their designs and costumes as distinct as possible to allow the most differentiation in the most circumstances from near near shots, far shots, or whatever.
This looks really fun.
Yeah, this looks cool, man.
I'm paging through it, scanning through it right now as I'm looking at it, and it just looks like a really fun series. Like I can't wait for news on where this is going to be published and when I can get my hands on it. It's really cool.
Well, I'll keep you posted, and if anyone's curious about what any of this looks like, if they check out my Facebook feed, I've put some samples of some of what we're talking about. I've done a cover for issue 1 and done some snippets of stuff, so just check me out on Facebook and go through my picture feed. You can see some of the stuff we're talking about.
Let's actually do that. As long as we're talking about that right now, let's talk about that. Where can people find, normally your Facebook feed is a way to find information about you. Where would you like people to go after this to find more information about your work and obviously Action Labs as well?
Right. For information about Fracture, you should check actionlabcomics.com or the Action Lab Facebook feed. I'm on Facebook under Chad Ciconne, and I post a lot of art samples and previews and things on there. I also have an art blog that I update a little less frequently, but a couple times a month I'm throwing up art samples there, and that's chadciccone.com, all one word, ChadCicconi.com. And I also have a DeviantArt because it's a little bit different community of artists, and you can just search Chad Ciccone on DeviantArt, and my art will come up there. I have a Twitter. I don't tweet a great deal, and a Tumblr that's, again, just Chad Ciccone. My Twitter is Chad Ciccone, one word.
You know what? I will put in our show notes, too, links to all of that. So if for anybody listening right now, if you're driving along and listening to this, or not somewhere where you can write those down, you can actually click right from our website through the show notes, or on your device, actually, it'll be in the show notes attached to the episode. So it's a great way to get to all of those.
But what do you think of the alien design in this? It was fun designing that alien with the strange heads.
The thing I love about aliens and when they're done right is it's cool the way, when they've got unique facial structures like this, how their personality is conveyed differently. I mean, there's a lot of personality being shown here in facial expressions, but it has to be done slightly differently than you would do a human because of the fact that there's just different things in the face.
I gave a lot of thought to how their heads and their bodies would work. I have the mouth on a little stalk, and they have a stalk coming up the top of their head that are sort of prehensile, and then they have a tail coming out the back. So their heads kind of look a little bit like a slug with a mouth, and I gave a lot of thought to how would that work? What would it look like when they're talking? What would it look like when they're not talking?
Yeah, it looks like the trunk or the mouth, whatever, it rolls back up when they're not talking.
Yeah, their head kind of looks like a football that has an elephant's trunk on both ends.
Yeah.
And I have a whole sort of physiological backstory to why their heads look like that and what each trunk does. But they're fun to draw. They're actually easier to draw than people, humans, because, and I find in most cases aliens are easier to draw than people because your eye is not as sensitive to variations causing things to not look right. Like a human head, we're all programmed to know what a human head and a human face is supposed to look like. So if you mess up the proportions a little bit on a human head, it looks wrong. An alien, I designed these aliens, so if I have some variability in how they look, it doesn't register as wrong to your eye. So you don't have to be quite as precise in drawing them to make them come off believable and right.
You know what I really liked? A lot of times I get caught up and captivated in the faces that I forget to take a look at the appendages. The hands, because the hands are structured differently, it stands out like when you see one of the aliens, the backs to us, is trying to get the attention of a crowd. Mm-hmm. But then we see another one speaking. We see the same alien speaking, I should say, because I'm looking back at the previous page. And you see the way he's conveying what he's saying differently in his hands. Like the hands, because there's, 2 fingers and a thumb?
Actually, 1 finger and 2 thumbs.
Oh, cool.
The way I designed that hand is there's like an index finger with a thumb on either side of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and you can actually see when he's holding up the one.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's really cool.
Now, how do they flip each other the bird if they only have the 1 finger?
They always do.
Turn the hand around. Yeah, it's easy. If you only have 1 finger, you're always flipping the bird, right?
This is cool.
Well, I'm enjoying. I'm having fun drawing it. I'm challenging myself to improve as an artist, and it's a fun, different working relationship than I have with Sean Gabrin. But Dino Crusoe and I are, exchanging emails, and he's doing plotting for issue 2 as I'm doing layouts for issue 1. And I've never worked Marvel style before, and I don't think he has either. So it's an interesting. It's an interesting experience, and I'm enjoying it. And if anybody doesn't know what Marvel style is, he didn't do a full script for this. He gave me page synopsis. Here's what happens on this page. Here's what happens on this page. Here's what happens on this page. These 2 characters have to get from here to there on this page. And I did all the layouts and the panel selection. And then now that he's seen the issue, he's going to go back and do the dialogue over top of what I did. So it does allow the artist a little more freedom, and I worked full script with Sean Gabrin on Fracture, so he would give me panel 1, Virtue punches Malice, panel 2, Malice falls over the table. And that has its own challenges, but I'm finding it a little more fun to do Marvel style, and if the writer I'm working with enjoys it and likes it too, I think we're going to at least try issue 2 Marvel style as well.
That's cool. One of the things I really like, and I'm really enjoying with you and artists in general nowadays, I really appreciate the openness that you have with Facebook as far as posting artwork that you're doing, things that you're working on, things you're excited about that you did. You do a little commentary when you post things. That's always fun for me. It makes my news feed like so much more interesting because I'm a fan of your artwork. So it's fun to be able to see, oh wow, look what he did now, and then it takes me to your page and I start like looking through some of the other things that maybe I didn't log on for a couple of days and I missed something else that you had posted. It's cool to see that kind of stuff. What's interesting for me is I guess a question that's coming out of this from, you mentioned working on Marvel style on this one. You've been involved in a variety of different projects, because I knew you before Fracture. I got a chance to see your work kind of grow over time, and I really love that because I enjoyed your work from the beginning straight on through. I like your storytelling style because you're a fan of the experience, and I love that. That gets me. That's what hooks me. But also seeing your experimentation that you do when you're drawing and different commissions that you've done and different posts, when you're playing around with art. Seeing that, do you find that like when you like this project, when you're doing something Marvel style now and doing it this way, do you think like when you do I guess like a Fracture Volume 3 or whatever the next project's going to be after this one, do you find that like if it's that you're taking things away from this now that are going to feed your next project that you work on?
That's the hope for everything I do, Sean. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I have a disadvantage in that I'm not an 8-hour-a-day full-time artist. I admire people like Mike Norton, mm-hmm. who I know has a crazy work ethic, and he's a full-time artist, and he's busting his hump every day for 8 hours, and he's improving every second of that because of experience. Art is experience, and the more you do, there's a spark of talent in there, but the more you hone your craft, the better you get. I'm doing art for 2 hours, or 2.5, 3 hours a day, so I'm at a disadvantage against all those other folks who are full-time artists. So everything I draw and every project I do and every script I read and try to interpret, I'm really trying to wring every last iota of improvement for myself out of that, because I hope and believe I can get to the point that I want to be as an artist, to be, to put out stuff of the quality of anybody else. I was mentioning Six Gun Gorilla last night, and I was reading that going, I'm not at this level yet. I want to be at this level of, I don't want to mimic that artist's style, but looking at that artist, I'm like, he's doing stuff that I don't know how to do yet. So I'm really just trying to push and push and push myself on every project. With every second I'm at the drawing board, how do I do this better? How do I do this better? What's wrong with this page? How do I make this page better and more dynamic and tell the story better? So absolutely, I'm trying to wring every drop of learning and experience out of every project I have, and That's why one of the reasons I've made the switch to digital. That's why I'm doing Marvel style, because I never did it before, and it might make me a better artist.
Do you read comics? Do you find that you read comics differently than when you were younger because of what you do?
I pay attention more to stuff I didn't pay attention to when I was little. When I was younger and reading comics, I was like anybody else, reading great story. Look how cool Spider-Man looks on this Todd McFarlane page. Wow, look at all that crazy webbing. Now that I'm an artist, I'm still reading the story as a consumer of stories. We're interested in the concepts and the story and the characters, but there's no way around the fact that when I look at a comic book page, I'm looking at what the artist did. Wow, look at what they did with the shadows there. Or look how they laid out this page. Or look at this vertical panel. I would never have thought to do that. Or how did they do that effect? Or what did the colorist do there? My eye sees it now, just because I'm an artist who's drawn a comic book page. I suppose when you're an architect and drive by a building, you're looking at how or a carpenter, you drive by a garage and go, wow, look at what they did with the roof.
That's a great analogy, or a great series of analogies. That's it's cool to see that. I'm a huge fan of your work. It's and I think there's a personal stake there too, because I've known you for a while from conventions and from Mercury the Murd and things like that. Fracture just blew me away. I mean, it was the art, the dynamic of the storytelling. To have an opportunity and I really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to take a early look at this project, because I'm super excited for it. And honestly, I'd like to when you get a publisher and you guys are at the stage where you're going to publish the issue, I hope you'll come back, because I would love to be able to sit down and really talk about the first issue of this complete, and to be able to talk about it, having seen it in this stage, and then being able to see it like with the dialogue and the colors and everything all together, and to talk about that experience and follow up with it. So I'd love to follow up with this book.
Well, I'll definitely keep you posted. And I mean, you were asking earlier about posting stuff up on Facebook, and I think there's a new normal as far as that goes with artists and creator-owned stuff. It used to be people would hold everything close to the vest, and I'm working on a project, but I can't really tell you anything about it. Mm-hmm. You've heard that before, and I think that's still the case. You're working on something for Marvel, they're going to make a big announcement or whatever. But on creator-owned stuff, at this point, part of the name of the game is getting people engaged and supporting you. You just said it, that you have an investment in what I'm doing because you know me and you've seen me and you like my art. Thank you very much. And I love coming on your show because it's an ego stroke for me. But you're kind of invested in what I'm doing because we know each other and we're friends and we see each other at conventions and stuff and we like each other. So that's, for creators, that's the stock in trade now. That's why we post stuff up on Facebook and throw stuff up on Tumblr and show covers of stuff. The advantage of that, of getting people invested in what you're doing and making fans out of them, the people who will go out and buy it, is how creator-owned books can get noticed and can get seen and can get supported, as opposed to just, well, you don't hear anything for 2 years and then, oh, here's our book. Wait, here's our book. So I think the new model is throwing out stuff and letting people in on the process and talking about it and trying to get people excited and waiting for it.
It's one of the reasons why, on the show, I don't remember when we started doing it because we didn't do it in the initial first episodes, but we very quickly started announcing creators on the show. Doing it horribly because I butcher names constantly. Jim butchers names constantly. It's not intentional. But the idea is...
You're not the only podcasters who do that, so don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's I think I know I've done it since my childhood because I've met some of my, heroes growing up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, have I been butchering that person's name in my head since I was a kid? Because we don't hear the names. But one of the reasons why I've started doing that is I think nowadays creators such as yourself are taking the time to reach out to fans and to create that relationship. And I think it's important. It increases my enjoyment. It's great to be able to see somebody whose work that you admire and to be able to follow when you're doing something casually because you're like, hey, today I was drawing and I was experimenting and look what I came up with. Here's this. On the other hand, here's something that I'm doing for a project, and what do you guys think of that? I love that whether I'm directly involved or I'm just clicking the like button, as far as in the conversation thread that ensues afterwards, it's great to feel like when we're not sitting in front of each other now, we have this opportunity to be able to be communicating and be a part of the stages of artistic growth. Because I was going to say stages of a project, but it's not as simple as that. It goes far beyond that now, because not everything you post is for a project that you're currently working on. And some of it is artwork that you're doing, for a convention, artwork that you're doing to experiment and grow for yourself. And it's great to have that insider's view.
Well, it's the new model of how some creators can work. I may have mentioned this before on your show, but it was a musician. Who's the guy who did the song about the zombies? Jonathan Colton.
Yeah.
I think he came up with the notion of, if you want to be an independent creator and support yourself with your work, and there's others who are doing this, you essentially need to find a way to create 1,000 super fans, which are people who will buy whatever you put out, and then put out $100 worth of stuff a year, and you've made yourself $100,000.
Yeah.
You now have an income. So it's all about cultivating relationships. I mean, look at Dave Wachter, right?
Absolutely.
Look at what Dave's done with the Guns of Shadow Valley and the Kickstarter. There's a whole community of people who have been following Dave for the better part of 10 years, looking at what he's done and enjoying his artwork and watching his growth, just like mine. You were talking about me growing as an artist. There's a guy who's just grown leaps and bounds over the last 10 years of people interacting with him and going on podcasts and posting stuff on message boards and stuff, growing and growing and growing, and slowly cultivating a base of people who support you and like your art and buy your art and buy your comic books. And he's got the Guns of Shadow Valley. He's drawing Godzilla for IDW. He's making a success of himself out of this new model of involving yourself with the community of people who might like your work.
I remember, I think it's where the podcast community is, because I'm a podcast listener as well as a podcaster. I actually started as a listener before I was podcasting, Comic Geek Speak. And that's where I heard him first with Scar Tissue.
Absolutely.
And
And how far has Dave come since Scar Tissue?
Oh, and I loved, here's the thing. I loved Scar Tissue. So it's amazing to look back at that early work and still enjoy it and see that's part of what I enjoy about revisiting an artist's work.
Exactly. And you and I are invested in Dave Wachter now and his work in a way that wouldn't have been possible before the internet and podcasts and everything, because you look at what Dave Wachter is doing now and it's layered with your understanding of kind of who he is as an artist and what he's done in the past. And that was much more difficult in years past for anybody other than, Art Adams and John Byrne, who were megastars in the 80s. Everybody kind of knew everything they were doing. But short of that level of fame and popularity, you couldn't. It was hard to follow people in that way.
You had to wait for conventions if you happen to have a local one where a certain artist was going to be, or for magazine buzz. That was really the only ways. I can't tell you how many independent books I picked up from things like Hero and Wizard and stuff like that because they were shouted out there. But I also look at what I missed.
There was no way to have that direct connection that you can have now through Twitter and Facebook and all that type of stuff. If you stood in line at a convention, you might get 30 seconds talking to your favorite artist, but it wasn't like you were going to be able to look over his shoulder at his drawing board once a week and see what he was working on, like Facebook lets people do.
Yeah, I find that I discover so many more people now from things that other people that, I'm like, oh, wow, okay, I followed this guy's Kickstarter, and he really likes this person, so maybe I should check out what they're doing. There's a lot of stuff I get from wandering around the internet now that I think is such a rich experience of seeing what new people are doing that I've never known before. They, when I say they're new people to me, they may have been around for quite some time, but I discovered them because of some connection that just was a happy accident where the person happened to like something that they were doing, and I happened to come across it because of that. And I like that sense of discovery, because then you become a fan of something that you would have never seen in the old days, where we didn't have that kind of opportunity. So the viral marketing that goes on with comics and comic artists now and creators in general, I think is great. It's a wonderful community aspect. You feel like you're a part of something on a level that I don't think we ever had the opportunity to be a part of before.
It goes both ways. I think the artists benefit from it and enjoy it as well.
Chad, is there anything that we haven't shouted out that you wanted to make sure we got in on the episode?
No, other than let me put on my Action Lab hat for a minute and suggest that everybody jump onto Facebook and look at the Action Lab feed. There were a lot of announcements from Action Lab at San Diego Comic-Con that just ended. A lot of new books coming out in 2014, 2015 in both the Action Lab and the Danger Zone lines. And we also made a big announcement that Action Lab is going to be partnering with the producers of the Puppet Master series of films and doing a licensed comic of the Puppet Master universe, written by my colleague Sean Gabrin, the writer of Fracture. He's going to be doing the writing and working with the Puppet Master producers to find a select group of artists to prepare those books, and we're really excited about that. Sean is a rabid horror fan and I can tell you, I've talked to him about this, and he is thrilled to be working on that license.
I am a huge fan of horror comics, and I don't get as many of them as I would like. I'm a fan of that film series, so I was like, ooh, wait, they got me on this one. So that's cool. I'm excited about that. One of the things
one other thing I wanted to mention,
Sure.
If you like superhero comics, we've just come out with Midnight Tiger. And there's another book coming out called Stray that were both highlighted out at San Diego. And I have heard in the works that there's going to be a little bit of an Action Lab verse, sort of a shared universe amongst a few Action Lab comics that are going to be doing some crossovers. It's going to be fun to watch.
Nice. I'm into that. That's really exciting. And all of that we can find out from Action Lab's Facebook.
You can either go to Action Lab's Facebook feed, just search Action Lab on Facebook, or obviously the website actionlabcomics.com. There are some announcements, and there was a posting, I believe, on Facebook of a video that was part of, we did a panel. I wasn't at San Diego, but a bunch of folks from Action Lab were, including Kevin Freeman. And we did a panel out there on Saturday, and there's some video of parts of that panel where there were a lot of announcements made. There's a video I saw of the Puppet Master announcement. One of the producers of Puppet Master joined them at the panel, and there's some video of that. And a lot of the other, I think you can see the slideshow that was used during the presentation that has the announcements of all of our upcoming books for both the Action Lab and Danger Zone line for the upcoming year.
Is it different seeing a company you're so involved with have presentations at San Diego? I mean, I can imagine that's got to be like really cool to be able to see that kind of thing unfolding.
It's the whole ride of Action Lab from the beginning until now has been both surreal, insanely difficult, and incredibly gratifying. There's always the notion of, as a creator and an artist, there is still a moment when I hold the book in my hand that I spent countless hours drawing. There's a thrill to that that's almost indescribable. I haven't held yet a copy of the Fracture trade in my hand because I've been traveling and I haven't been able to get to the store. And I actually don't know if it's there this week or if it's going to hit next week. It's always tricky to figure that out from how Diamond lets us know. But that moment when I hold the Fracture trade in my hand is going to be sort of an ecstatic moment for me. But watching Action Lab and how it has grown, and the combination of hard work and talented people we've been able to work with, a healthy dose of luck, but watching it blossom to the point where we're doing panels at San Diego Comic-Con announcing 20 books for the next year, and every one of them is a book that I'd want to read. I can't describe that feeling to you. It's ridiculous and laughable and amazing and fun and exciting, all rolled into one. I really don't have a great desire to go to San Diego because I've heard a lot of things that I don't like about that show, but the moment I get really jealous is when I watch the panels that my colleagues are out doing and the reactions of people to the books. But I'm going to Fan Expo in Toronto. Brian Seaton and I are going up to that show for the first time, so I'm looking forward to seeing what that show is all about.
We're in a great era where there's so many different kinds of conventions out there now. I think that's a good thing too, because conventions have become culturally more acceptable. And what I mean by that is I think conventions have now developed a casual crowd of people who would have never considered going before, that now all of a sudden are excited to go, and I think that's great.
The nerds have taken over the world. Everybody's clamoring to get on board what we've been appreciating in the solitude of our own basements for the last 20 years. Big Bang Theory and all that.
Yeah.
But conventions are really enjoyable, and I don't go to a great number of them. I probably go to 3 or 4 a year, and I was just at Heroes Con a few weeks ago and really enjoyed that again. And just to plug where I'm going to be at the West Virginia PopCon. Do you know about that one, Sean?
No, I don't.
How far are you from Morgantown? How long would it take for you to get to Morgantown?
I don't even know. I've never been.
Morgantown is 40 miles south of Washington, PA.
Okay.
There's a guy who owns a comic book store in Fairmont who started a show 2 years ago. His attendance wasn't huge over the last 2 years, but the bizarre thing to me was we made more at that show than we had at a number of other shows because everybody who came there was supporting everybody and buying stuff. It was almost bizarre, and we've been working with the guy, and we've been back last year, and we're going back this year, and his attendance is growing and growing, and he's a real go-getter. And called the West Virginia PopCon. It's a Saturday-Sunday show, and it's in Morgantown, and it's
it looks like it's 3.5 hours for me.
I want to say it's like the 23rd of August. It's in a few weeks, and then the following week we're going to Fan Expo in Toronto, and then I'll be at the Pittsburgh Comic Con that we're going back to again this year because that's really close to me, obviously. I don't know that I have anything else scheduled for the rest of the year, but Action Lab will be at New York Comic Con and several others through the rest of the year. That's one of the good things about Action Lab being spread out across the country. We're able to have a presence at a lot of shows, and no individual one of us has to go everywhere.
I was bummed that Cleveland Con didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, I was really upset about that because, and I still haven't gotten an explanation as to really why that show got abruptly canceled, because they had reached out to Action Lab, and we were going to have a huge presence at that show. We had been working with them, and we were going to have a whole Action Lab island, and we had invited probably 10 different creators to come. We were going to make a big splash at that show, and then kind of 3 weeks before it was supposed to happen, there was a notification that, well, we've canceled the show.
Do you think Wizard has a convention that's coming to Cleveland February of 2015?
That was the speculation, but there was never any real confirmation why they cut it short. That's kind of what, I forget who, but somebody had speculated and said, well, they didn't want to take on Wizard, but who knows?
To me, if you schedule your con, move your time, I guess. Once Wizard comes, they could still do the con, but maybe do it a September con or something like that if the Wizard's doing theirs in February. I don't know. I'll certainly go to more than one con.
Well, yeah.
We had one.
It's a risk, though. Cons take a lot of money to start up. And once you've done it and proved that you can draw the crowd, it's much easier to do the second year. But that was a brand new group coming in with a brand new con in Cleveland, weren't they? That show had never been done before.
No, we haven't had a con. We had a startup a few years ago. Somebody won a lottery, and one of their dreams, and I'm probably horribly paraphrasing the story, but one of their dreams was to do a con. So they did 2 of it. I think what ended up happening was the date was moved on the second one so many times that the attendance wasn't what the first one's was.
Well, didn't there used to be a show not too far from Cleveland that was like Tiki Con or
That's
something?
the one, Screaming Tiki Con.
Yeah.
There was 2 of those. They did 2 Screaming Tiki Cons, and
they never did any more?
No.
I was supposed to go to that one year, and I forget what happened. I either kind of got sick or something fell through. I was registered to go to that show one of the years it went on.
The first one that they did, it was in this huge area, and it was a drive to get to. I forget the city it was in. It was a trek for me, but it wasn't in Cleveland per se. It was in a suburb of Cleveland, but certainly close enough.
Yeah, it was like in, what was it, Lima or something? I forget where it was supposed to be.
And the second one they did downtown, but when they did it downtown, there was another pop culture fest that was going on, and they were like in a building on one of the upper floors, and it was they had Michael Rosenbaum there from Smallville. They had some people from at Battlestar Galactica, like Edward James Olmos was there. I mean, they had like quite a cast of people, but it had a nice crowd, but certainly not for the caliber of people that they had. And I feel that's probably largely what happened. But I think that sometimes happens when you change the venue so drastically. It wasn't the easiest place to find in downtown Cleveland. I like literally we're walking at this other convention and I'm looking around and I'm like, where is this thing? Anyway, it was nice. I really liked it, and I was sad that they didn't do another one because it was a great con. I'm always sad when I see especially something that's more of an independent con fall apart or get canceled because I think we're in a nice era where you've got your big companies that are doing their cons, and I like those. I quite enjoy those. But I also like the smaller startups or the ones that have been around for a long time that are smaller but more family-owned or something like that, because I think there's a different atmosphere. And I think people that are casually attending cons now are getting a chance to see just the variety of different experiences you can get going to different types of cons, with different levels of media being involved, and then some that are just straight comic conventions. They're all great, and they all offer different opportunities. It's cool. But like you said, sometimes you get those magical ones where they're more community-oriented, and you get this kind of cultural bond with the people that attended and the people that were guests, and I love those experiences. It's a unique opportunity that comes along every so often.
If you don't mind a 3-hour drive, I would commend the West Virginia PopCon to you in a couple of weeks. Come down Saturday morning and spend the day. I'll buy you lunch. That's a fun little show.
I am highly tempted because see, my big problem is I'm starting a new job.
Yeah.
But it's only 3.5 hours.
It's almost a day trip. Come down Saturday, spend the day, then drive back.
Yeah. I'll keep you posted because there's a very good possibility.
Yeah, let me know if you're coming. Action Lab's going to have a big table there, and I'm actually also going to have a Chad Ciconne artist table there next to the Action Lab table. Brian's coming down and going to man the Action Lab table, so I'm bringing my art stuff down. It's a coin flip these days whether when I go to a show I go to kind of rep Action Lab and run an Action Lab table, or I go as my Chad Ciconne artist hat with sort of an artist alley type table. Sometimes I run the Action Lab table and then squeeze a little Chad Ciconne stuff on the side. But the tables were so cheap at West Virginia PopCon that I got my own table, so I'll have my whole sketch cards and portfolios and stuff there with me.
That's cool.
Well, I'm looking forward to that show to see how it's grown since last year, and I'm looking forward to seeing Fan Expo in Toronto for the first time. We're going to be working with one of our creators lives in Toronto, a guy named Anthony Rutgazer, who's the writer of the First Hero, Action Lab title First Hero, that's just been coming. I think the first issue might be out here shortly in the next month or so. And he's based locally in Toronto. And he was with us at New York Comic Con last year. And he was bugging us the whole time. You guys got to come up to Toronto. Fan Expo, it's huge. It's like the second biggest show in North America. You got to see it. Action Lab should come. So he convinced us to go up this year. And I'll be very interested to see that show for the first time.
it's really nice that every time I turn around, somebody's introducing me to some new con. I have to be more judicious these days because of my job switch. As far as it's not, I would love to be able to go. It's more of finding the time to be able to go to as many. I'm like you. I hit like usually, if I'm lucky, 3 or 4 a year. But what I think one of my goals this year is going to be in the coming year is going to be to try and each year hit a con that I haven't been at before. Just, take one of those ones that I normally rotate and kind of go, you know what, I'm going to make this kind of my floater slot and try to hit some conventions that I've never been to before, because there's so many great ones that I hear from people that they go to, both large and small, that I would like to hit just to be a part of that experience.
Well, you planning to come down to Pittsburgh this year? There really should be a show in Cleveland. When did you say Wizard is?
Wizard's in February. Yeah. I've always liked Pittsburgh too. I've always found that to be a great and enjoyable con. So.
Well, it's local for us, so it's easy for us to go. We don't have any hotel costs or travel costs or anything, so I'll probably almost always end up going to the Pittsburgh show just because it has a place in my heart. As first show I ever tabled at, and being my local show, I'd love it if they moved that show downtown. Actually, Monroeville's a little far from me where I live, just in terms of which side of Pittsburgh I'm on. And I would love to see a true Pittsburgh Comic Con downtown Pittsburgh. They have a beautiful convention center there, but I understand the economics are probably very different. It's probably way more expensive to get that big downtown convention center versus what they would pay to get the center out in Monroeville.
Like you mentioned earlier, that's part of the problem nowadays. It's the startup costs, and you have to consider the venue when you're thinking of that.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, well, buddy, is there anything else that you want to shout out that we haven't had a chance to?
Not right now. I should probably get to drawing here.
All right, well, we want to thank you once again for joining us. We always have a great time talking to you, and I'd love to follow up with you when the book's complete and you guys have a publisher. I'd love to really sit down and talk about it.
I'll absolutely do that. You don't have to ask me twice to come on a podcast and talk about myself.
Well, you've always got an open invite, so please, I love your work, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you and see where you're going. So any time that we can talk about your work, I'm always open to it.
Well, thank you both.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Reaching melting point. Not sure we can make it.
I want to remind everyone about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or drnorge on Skype. We love having you part of the show. Voicemails will return on our next episode. Also want to shout out our website, ragingbullets.com. It's a place you want to go to find out news about the show. I always post on there when episodes are going to be released or the status of editing the show. Especially with my new job right now, it's a good way to find out where we're at time-wise so you know when we're going to be getting new content from Raging Bullets. It feeds into our Twitter. It also feeds into our Raging Bullets Facebook page. Besides our regular Facebook page, we do have a Facebook group that we share with DCinfinite.com. It's a wonderful and rich community that's grown so far beyond the show. And I want to just once again thank, I know I do this a lot of episodes, but it really means a lot to me. The fact that it's grown into a community that's so far beyond our podcast. It's filled with fans. It's filled with people who are bloggers, podcasters. It talks about, there's obviously a DC focus. There's also a focus on just pop culture in general. So it's great open discussions about the things that we want to talk about. And it's a wonderful, safe, fun, open dialogue community. So if you've never been a part of a Facebook group before, please consider joining it and join in on the conversation. We're also available on Google+. I have a personal Facebook page. I have a personal Google Plus page. Feel free to add me on all those. I mainly post from my personal Facebook account. So please feel free to add me if you want to chat with me directly. We love chatting with you about anything podcast related. Sponsors episode, once again, is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, this is Vertigo month. So it's 50% off the Vertigo bundle, which is a great way to save some money on the single issues. But also, if you're a fan of the trades, and we talked actually on this episode about, the great culture of people that are straight-to-trade collectors, you can pick those up at 50% off as well from sponsor DCBService.com. Over at InStockTrades.com. If you have not read Fracture, one of the great things about talking to the friends friends that we've made on this podcast is talking about work that really is work that we enjoy and are proud to endorse. And Fracture is one of those books for me. Fracture you can pick up at InStockTrades.com for only $8.99. That's 25% off the price. It's 128 pages, collects the full volume 2, 1 through 4. If you didn't pick up the series, this episode has to tell you why you should pick it up. So please support our friend of the show, Chad Ciconne. And I want to thank InStockTrades.com and DCBService.com for supporting our show. Our next episode, we actually already have it recorded. We're doing part 3 of our look at bad DC movies. This would be, of course, Catwoman, the one that a lot of you have been waiting for. And then after that, we're going to jump into the Future's End discussion. We're going to jump right back to that. So we have some great episode content coming your way. We're once again joined by friend of the show, Art Lyon, on that episode, and we will see you then.
Bye!
On November 13th, Sean Whalen was asked to stop constantly talking about comic books. That request came from his wife. Deep down, he knew she was right, but he also knew that someday he would find someone that would talk to him. With nowhere else to go, he appeared at the home of his childhood friend, Jim Seguin. Sometime earlier, Seguin's boss had requested that he shut up about his comic books and never speak of them again. Can two grown men put out a DC Comics podcast without driving each other crazy? It's Raging Bullets, the DC Comics fan podcast. With Sean Whalen as Dr. Norge, and Jim Seguin as the Sensei of the Whatnot and the Duke of You-Know. It's a spoiler podcast, so they will go in depth into the plot line, story twists, and whatnot of the comics they are reviewing. So if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you may better enjoy the show.